Welcome, dear listeners, to the first edition of Real Talk with Roberta's House podcast, where we take a deep exploration into a universal emotion that touches all of us at one point in our lives, grief. I'm your guest, Garry O Neal Jr., and I am the new Special Projects Coordinator with Roberta's House Youth Emotional Wellness Program. And so today we ask the question, how deep is your grief? We will be delving into various aspects of grief, discussing how it can impact behavioral health, the psyche, and why it's crucial to address it head on. Joining us today is Miss Aneesha Scott, the clinical director here at Roberta's House. Miss Scott, just a little bio about her. Miss Scott is a licensed clinical social worker in Maryland, in DC, as well as Virginia. And Aneesha has provided social work services to children, adolescents, adults, families within residential settings, private settings. She currently facilitates individual therapy, group therapy, family therapy for individuals and their families. Aneesha believes that her purpose is to advocate for others, advocate for social injustice, and serve marginalized and or oppressed groups in our society. Welcome, Ms. Scott. How you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
I am doing.
To be here.
Oh, I'm great. I am so welcome that you're able to make time for us in your busy schedule. So, episode 1, how deep is your grief? So let's just dive into it, shall we?
Yeah, let's go.
All right. So first question for everybody, because we've heard so many things, so many different definitions. There's so much information out here. But let's just start off with a very simple question. What is grief?
Thank you for that question. What is grief? Grief is simply the process of experiencing and working through the psychological, the behavioral, the social, the physical reactions of a loss, right? And when we're talking about grief, I think it's important that we even address what loss is. And loss is having had and having no longer. And so when we experience a loss, we ultimately experience some type of grief. And there's several types of losses and there's several types of grief. And the one that we hear often is normal grief. And what normal grief is just the reactions to a death loss. And oftentimes when we have that reaction to a death loss, there's characteristics that happen with that, but somebody's able to recover from that. So they're able to engage in their daily activities, engage in going back to work, going back to school. But then there's another part of it, which is that complicated grief.
So we have normal grief, and then we have complicated grief.
Yeah.
Wow. Okay. All right. So when we hear about the normal grief, the complicated grief, the unresolved grief, how do I know? Because often you may see people on social media, you see people out and about, and people's first response, especially if something's going on, is say, "Hey, I'm good." How would I know if I or someone, family, friend, spouse, anybody, how would I know if somebody I loved was having this experience?
Yeah, so oftentimes complicated grief is, in my world, as the therapy world, is diagnosed as prolonged grief disorder. And that's when you just are not able to function in your daily activities or just function as your normal self when a loss happens. And so that prolonged grief is diagnosed for adults after 12 months. So that's just 12 months have went by and you've experienced that loss and you just cannot move forward. You cannot engage in your normal life, your daily activities. And then for children, it's only 6 months. So children and adolescence is 6 months of that. And when a person is experiencing that prolonged grief, we have several things that happen, right? So it's that intense emotional pain. It could be anger, bitterness, frustration, sometimes even revenge. People want to get revenge for what has happened. And then you have maybe some somatic symptoms, like you may have stomach aches and headaches, and you may just not feel like yourself in your body. And then you may have other things like you're not able to re-engage back into society. Like you can't hang out with your friends anymore. You can't hang out with your family. You just don't want to be around them. You may have some emotional numbness where you just don't even want to interact with anybody at all. Right. And that's where that social piece comes in. You just may not want to interact. You may not want to be around other people. It's the isolation of it all. And then we have intense loneliness. Right. And you just feel lonely all the time. You miss that. And sometimes it's when, you have a spouse and you've lived with them for a long time. You miss that person and you just don't want to be around anybody except that person. So it's that loneliness that happens. And then we also have intense feelings of meaninglessness, like life is just not worth living anymore. Or we have like crying spells. Sometimes they're just crying all the time. They can't get over it, right? They try to talk about the death, and it brings back, tragic memories where they just can't process or move forward. And really, when we talk about that complicated or unresolved grief, we often characterize it as being stuck in your grief.
And so and I really wanted to just highlight one important thing. So we can start grieving a day, 2 days, 3 days. But as far as from a therapy standpoint, it's that prolonged. You said, and I just want to highlight that again. You said 6 months for children.
Yeah.
And up to a year, at minimum a year for adults.
Yes. Yep.
And that's when it's just a complete, the things you just talked about where there's just a withdrawal from what's going on.
Yeah, it's
Thank
intense.
you for highlighting that.
Of course.
And so just, so you talked about 6 months, 12 months, and these things happen. But the crying spells, sort of withdrawing from activities, that's going to happen in those time frames, right?
Yeah, that is characterized under that normal grief, right? But when we talk about those crying spells and, we just mean it more it happens more frequently, right? And it's happening after that 12 month. Like it could potentially be happening every day where we're just having those crying spells and we just can't move forward. And sometimes it's because of the disbelief in regard to the death. You can't believe that it's happening.
Okay, and thank you for that. So, you highlighted a lot about the physical aspects, and so, of course, grief is going to affect us physically, mentally, and so when we talk about that, let's highlight a little bit about the psychological well-being. So, how does grief, because things are happening, how does grief impact our psychological well-being?
Yeah, so when grief is unresolved or when it's cumulative, that means you've experienced several deaths, or when it's complicated, it often can lead to anxiety, it can lead to depression, it can lead to that, again, prolonged grief disorder. It could lead to one just having that, what do we call it, grief brain, where you just can't remember certain things like you used to. And as a result, you start to have, those disorders, which affects you in a major way. It affects how you engage in your daily functioning.
Okay. All right. And again, we're just highlighting these things are normal, guys. So it's not that, I should get over it in a day, an hour. It just means that these things are real. Accept that it's real. Yeah. And then if it is prolonged, now we need to start reviewing what we need to do as far as supportive services.
Correct. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, which brings us to the amazing Roberta's House. So here at Roberta's House, so what is our approach supporting individuals and families who are grieving?
Yeah, so we have several different approaches here at Roberta's House. We focus on different frameworks, but our main framework is the 4 Tasks of Mourning by William Worden. And I'll name them off to you. So task 1 is to acknowledge the reality of the loss. And what that means is to allow somebody to tell their grief story. Oftentimes when people are having conversations and they're talking about their grief story, somebody butts in and was like, oh, my grandma died too. And they start talking about their grief story instead of allowing the person space and time to talk about their own grief story. And the second is to process the pain of grief. Processing the pain really looks like acknowledging all the feelings that go along with grief. Is it shock? Is it frustration? Is it sadness? Is it anger? Really acknowledging what they are and why you're experiencing that. A lot of people don't, have the space to just say, I'm angry because, I'm frustrated because. The third is to adjust to a world without the deceased. And so that could look like really embracing new roles in your life. So if I'm a mother and I lost a child, am I still a mother? If I'm a spouse or a wife and I no longer have my spouse, am I still married? There's all these things that we have to embrace, to adjust to this new world without that person. And then task 4, to find an enduring connection with the deceased in the midst of embarking on new life. And what that really means is, can I still move on and go about my daily life, but still embrace the fact that this person has meant a lot to me. I can still carry this person with me. I can still honor their life, but also live my life as well.
And when you guys get a chance, and we'll have the link to checking out Wharton's 4 Tasks of Grief. Just remember, we have a great acronym for that is TEAR. And so just like you highlighted, the T is to accept, the E is to experience, the A is to adjusting, and R is reinvesting. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
So we highlight that a lot about the task of grief. You highlighted that we have those peer support programs. And also we also provide here at Roberta's House behavioral health counseling that you're in charge of. So can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Yes. So here at Roberta's House, we have, again, behavioral health counseling in the form of individual therapy. We're going to be starting our group therapy. I'm excited about that, our therapeutic groups. We will be doing family therapy and couples therapy as well.
Oh, great. Couples therapy.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
wow. Okay.
And couples therapy is extremely important. A lot of people don't really, understand that when a couple experiences a loss, it damages the relationship. Sometimes there's blaming. Sometimes they don't know how to support one another while they're grieving.
And unfortunately, they may take it to the next level where they extinguish the relationship.
Yeah.
And so it's
that's
really
so
great.
true.
So, as we wrap this up, and thank you for being here today, what advice would you have for our listeners who right now may be struggling with grief?
Yeah. You can find strength in community. You can find strength in seeking support. Please call Roberta's House. Come to Roberta's House. We would love to support you. And you're not alone in your grief process. I know it may be difficult, but you're not alone, and we're here to help.
First, I want to thank Ms. Scott and our team at Roberta's House for this opportunity to host this inaugural episode of Real Talk with Roberta's House. Finally, thank you for joining us on Real Talk. If you find this episode or helpful or any other episodes that you may encounter, please share it with somebody who might benefit. Remember, you're not alone in this journey. And there is strength in facing your grief. So for more episodes, follow us. First of all, you should be following us on all of our socials. We're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, as well as if you want to listen to any of the podcasts, find us on any of the DSPs, wherever you listen to your favorite streaming services. So until next time, I do want to share with you Roberta's House mantra. I care for you. You care for me. And we care for each other. All right. Words that we live by here at Roberta's House. Until next time.